Okay, today I want to talk about classical Chinese calligraphy. Sometimes in these videos, I'm talking about ideas and trying to get some arguments across, maybe intellectual history. Other times, really trying to just turn us all on to some nice cultural artifacts that I just think are beautiful and interesting and nice and sensuous to experience. I'm going to call Chinese characters pictographs. I don't claim to know much about the Chinese written language, and that's not what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of these calligraphic symbols. Mostly, I'm just going to use the word calligraphy, but really what I want to do is for us to take our time and come to appreciate the beauty and really just look at as beautiful things these these objects, these beautiful calligraphic symbols. My computer is on control. I don't know what to talk about. There we go. That's not too messed up now. I'm just going to let it. Oh, there it is. I'm just going to let it do its thing. There we are. Okay. Okay. Classical Chinese calligraphy. There you see one way of looking at it is you have a little square and sort of how much can you put in the square. And so you have a sort of sub-tradition of these complex sort of structures. But, if we talk about Chinese painting, usually I have a couple other videos here in this series, one on Chinese painting. And we use that term for these objects. Really, they were the vehicle for what we would think of as poetry and painting, and above all as calligraphy, because for the Chinese, and this was this is all pretty upper class stuff that we're talking about here. But the sense of it was that it was in a person's hand, in their calligraphy. And these pictographs, there are about 3,000 of them, I think, and you have to learn, obviously, just as with words in Romance languages, the more you have would be a basic sort of measure of a person's intelligence or cultivation. And these are all sort of unique. So that the way to learn them is by rote and by practicing. A lot of the secret to, ironically, I think, a lot of the secret to the beautiful sort of spontaneity and self-expression that characterizes a lot of Asian art forms is actually what you think of as muscle memory, the way orchestral musicians, for example, or athletes have muscle memory. That is, in the sense of you do something long enough, then you're sort of, to put it in Asian, in the kind of Asian philosophical terms we've been thinking about, you're going to be able to sort of get beyond your own thoughts and get them out of the way. But in any event, in classical China, someone who was fluent in many hundreds or thousands of these pictographs was a very unique person. It wasn't easy. Remember, and these were feudal times and most people were illiterate anyway. And so it was, again, a very, very highly refined and fine art, a difficult, very difficult art to master. Third bullet point on the slide there, at the same time, remember this Taoist artistic tradition, this naturalist tradition. Remember the emphasis on landscapes and the symbolic nature of the landscape in classical Chinese art. And that's very much present in calligraphy as well, where there's a sense of the symbol is kind of a human leaving. The human trail is the symbol that the human has left, in the way that the fox might leave its path through the snow, if you will. I'm not sure if I made that up or not. I might have read that somewhere. That is, if there is this sort of getting beyond the self-conscious self, which is really a kind of hallmark of Asian ideas about art and creativity, then that comes with this incredible fluency with the form. So, and then at the same time, so that's sort of the Taoist naturalist side of it, which I think is really interesting. And then, of course, there's a very Confucian element here as well, where this is a conventional practice. and there's a right way and a wrong way of doing things. So, and of course, also it is sort of the ultimate expression of being a kind of member of civilization, I think, is the participation in this symbol system in classical China. Just again, really quickly, because really mostly we're on a sightseeing tour here. But obviously, and we are going to go chronologically through the artists that we're going to look at here today. You've got your historical chronological narrative, which is very nicely filled out because this was all taken very seriously in a very literate society. So you have a great deal of these objects have survived and a great deal of analysis of these objects, contemporary appreciations of these objects have also survived. And then there are also different styles and types of calligraphy and different styles and different masters or notable calligraphers in different styles. So the 3rd and 4th centuries, right around the time of Christ, or the time of the Roman Empire, last 2 centuries of the first millennium before the Common Era, and the first 2 centuries of the first millennium of the Common Era, time of the Han Dynasty and the sort of emergence of the Chinese nation. You have these symbols which really date all the way back. We also have a video in this here about the I Ching, all the way back to the 2nd millennium, when you have divination rituals and so on that first start people making these kinds of symbols. And then with the emergence of sort of, the Middle Kingdom after the Han Dynasty, you get clerical or utilitarian form, right? A form that's standardized, one of the first kinds of standardization, because the story of standardization in China is just the story of the growth of China. And then you have cursive, and cursive, a personal form, originally a form for the elite, and over the centuries, a form of some of the most original and daring artists, people who now, from our standpoint in the future, we look back and say, well, these were really some of the great calligraphers of all time, working in this cursive style, which is a freer hand, of course. And then something called regular style takes over later on the 8th to 10th centuries. Okay. And last bullet point there is, then China also had waves and waves, ongoing, actually, tradition of revivalism, strong cultural nationalism in China as well. There should be, considering the depth and richness of the Chinese culture. So you got always people excavating, and nowadays the calligraphy is still held in very high esteem. So calligraphy alive and well. Small seal script. Again, these are, this script is the script that sort of slowly emerges from the first millennium before the Common Era, along with these early editions of the I Ching and so on. Symbols that come out of unknown languages. There are actually some rather mysterious languages in the origin of Chinese language. And then you get the standardization, which is, of course, instantly recognizable. But this is very old. You're looking at symbology from about 2,000 years ago here. So then you also see a real enduring strength in this tradition. Notice also the complexity of some of these symbols. As I say, the cursive is something really only accessible to people who really dedicated really to the form. It's because of its fluidity and the sense, think of a sculpture, say, think of the neoclassical lions in front of the New York Public Library. There's some sculptures of lions. They're just very realistic naturalist sculptures of lions. Now think of the sculpture of a lion or the image of a lion that you would associate, say, with Chinese New Year's or something, that rather more phantasmagorical lion. And the lines are very sort of more fluid and curvy. They don't have, they're not as sharp. But one of the things that the aesthetic is getting is movement of nature. The movement of nature is something that is reflected in that sort of Taoist influence. And you can certainly see that in these beautiful cursive calligraphic lines coming down to us, really, again, looking at something from 1,800 years ago or older. That is to taste. If I use the adjective Confucian here, that would be referring to examples of calligraphy that were more formal with more recognizable and standard figures. And another thing to notice is it's not just the individual characters, but the way that they're arranged on the page. What I would call the Confucian scribe is going to be very interested in spacing and columns. And so there's going to be sort of a composition within a composition. Okay. And running script, a kind of demotic cursive. Again, just the expansion of the practice of writing is something that will map onto the emergence of different kinds of styles, the same kind of thing that we see with things like what's happening on the Rosetta Stone, for example, with Egyptian and Greek. So here you have a popular cursive. And, you know, the thing is, handwriting is just very, very personal. So part of it was, you know, this very persuasive sort of demonstration of a person by virtue of their handwriting, you know, and that was something where then you wanted to make your presentation something that was that showed cultivation, practice. And here, regular writing. None of these, by the way, is sort of stodgy compared to any of the others. I mean, look at that. Look at those symbols. You know, those are very dynamic. So when you say regular, I mean, these are fairly, I don't see these names as having much descriptive. They're mostly just historical titles for these waves of style. So we'll now just take our time and look at some of the masters, starting from, and again, I don't claim to be an expert on these people. What I am doing myself is just trying to enjoy these objects. And the stamps, as I've talked about in the Chinese classical painting video, are actually things that are affixed to these by many times by later owners who would also sort of participate in the art by putting the stamps on. And they also tell, of course, the story of the provenance of the script, and sometimes that is very impressive indeed. If you know what who those stamps represent, those are stamps that represent different owners and houses and so on. Okay, so again, this is about 1,700 years old, and this was the script that this person wrote in. There it is. Try to imagine writing it. Look at it and try to move your hand and imagine writing it. And these, and notice they would, you'd have different sides of the brush. And also you could even fool around with the mixers into your ink, which was resin paste mixed with water. And you could also even have different kinds of paper that had different kinds of absorption. So a lot of different ways of expressing yourself in the line, and the line is the thing. These larger pictographic instructions are made of individual lines. That is, rather than someone sort of moving through as someone writing English cursive handwriting would do. So look at them and see that there are individual lines that compose the larger structure. I was talking before about precision. You have cursive, which I like it, but I sort of like that kind of off the beat outside stuff. The other side of the aesthetic is the precision, you know, that's achieved by a great hand like that. And so, you know, this is, and this is the way he would write. I mean, it's not like, it looks like there's little lines between the columns. I mean, I don't want to talk about stuff that I don't know, but in any event, it's very, very beautiful. The 8th century, 1,200 years ago. The Song Dynasty had a lot of stuff going on, a lot of invention, a lot of science, and Su Shi was really a known mostly actually as a poet. I think if you had asked people at the time, from what I know, they would have said that he was a great poet. I think for us, for the early 21st century eye, the thing that jumps out are what we would call the paintings, the drawings. But with him, I find that he has this is a real question. You know what? It is a real art. It's a square. It's a nice square, a nice rectangle, and what can go into it elegantly so it all fits nicely. You know, very sort of beautiful Chinese aesthetic there. But you may very well have seen this before. It's part of a larger scroll. Many of these, I'm like, I can't really give you the sense of the scrolls here. But he has a beautiful, beautiful pencil and charcoal, I guess, on silk, ink on silk, ink on silk. Can you imagine? And there is his hand again. You know, just, and that's a very, I mean, that's very powerful, powerful hand. You can see the person, even if you have no idea what the Chinese pictographs are. Later on, you know, very, very predictably, because of Chinese nationalist sentiment, healthy Chinese nationalist sentiment in this case, you get continuous revivalism and a great appreciation. Really, we say it's revivalist, and we see that there are calligraphers in early modern and contemporary period who reach back and self-consciously do the same kind of calligraphy as the classical masters, but it's really just a reflection of the general high esteem that the genre is held in to this day. And we start in these beautiful illustrated manuscripts. So as I mentioned before, you know, you have the poetry and you have the drawing, mostly painting, interested in single lines, interested in naturalism, so fairly minimalistic from a painting point of view, fairly monochromatic for the most part. So, and the poetry on the other hand is naturalistic, using natural images, natural metaphors, natural analogies, like a landscape painting. The poetry is the linguistic equivalent of a landscape painting. And so considering those two facts, one about the paintings and one about the poetry, the meanings of the symbols themselves, the calligraphy, remember, which are held in the most esteem, right, between the triangulation of the three arts. But look, they are the bridge. They are both the pictographic representation of the world and the poetic expression of the world. They are the bridge between the word and the picture. And I think that's what makes this Chinese calligraphy so very, very special. And pay attention, that middle, you see the circle on the top, there's a big circle. Look at to the left of that. Look at the symbols to the left of that. Look at that writing. It's really just amazing. And then, of course, the same person who wrote the symbols. Again, we tend to call this form painting, but as I say in the video on classical Chinese painting, under the, you know, it's the question of genre. I mean, we try and fit this into our genres, Western conventional genres, and So it looks like a painting, but it's a poem. This is the way that the poem is presented on an illustrated manuscript. But not only that, not only is it a painting or a drawing, if you will, and not only is it a poem, but again, the calligraphy is something that kind of adds this other dimension. You're kind of moving between the uh, the two ways. Maybe thinking about the mind and the body almost, and the calligraphy being the bridge between the mind and the body. Maybe even you could go so far as to make something out of that. And just putting this in here because it's just a very beautiful picture that was there that the same person looked at. Now we're going to look at later. I look at, of course, now we have well-developed art form. The first stuff we were looked at was from the 4th century, and this is the 15th century. So this is 1,100 years later from where we started. Some of these languages that go on for thousands of years, think how much, say, English or Spanish have changed in, say, 400 or 500 years. If you're studying a language like classical Chinese or, say, ancient Egyptian, you're talking about 2,000 years, 3,000 years going by. The language is completely different by the end of 3,000 years it was at the beginning. Again, these are the same artists, these calligraphers, very frequently, the very same artists. Today, as I say, part of my mission here is, we're really much more focused on them as sort of what we would think of as landscape painters. Even they're not even really that into what we're thinking of painting. They're into the line, but they saw themselves as calligraphers. And it's very beautiful. It's just a couple thousand years of beautiful artists who just practice the craft, and geniuses. And here, like in the best European art, you can see the machinery. You can see where the artist has put the strokes onto the page. But of course, that's what calligraphy is all about, right? The stroke is actually the record of the action. So the way to look at the pictograph is as the record of an action. And so what you're evaluating is the action itself. In the same way you evaluate the action of putting the ink on the page to make the tree, but there's more depth to the action of making the pictograph. Yes, of that poetic element, among other things. And very monochromatic, going for minimalism. And a rich tradition that should just be mined for all kinds of great stuff. Is that? All right. Okay, so as I said, mostly today, really just wanting us all to stop and smell the roses a bit. I was at a get-together last Friday night, and one of my friends who was there was talking about studying Mandarin and his experience these days as he's studying Mandarin. So that was very, very interesting, because I was just thinking that this weekend I would make this video, and my friend started to talk about Mandarin. So for some reason, the Chinese language came up for us here in Puerto Rico over the last few days. So that was really fun too. So I encourage you to then, there's all kinds of different ways to get into this. You can look at the Chinese language, you can look at the poetry, you can look at the art tradition, you can look at contemporary calligraphy. What are people doing right now? What are artists doing right now? That's a really fun topic to look at. There's lots of different things that you can look at here in terms of following up on this as a topic for us. So, all right. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I do. All right. Thanks. I shall stop the share.